Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jeff Gothelf.
And I'm in the show. Hey, Dave. Nice to see you again. Hey, folks. Great to be here. Virtually is always fun because we get folks from all over the world, and hopefully we get to start to see each other a bit more in person these days. A little bit more. Doesn't have to be a lot more like it used to be, but a little bit more would be nice. Absolutely. I'm super excited to be here and to chat with you. I've got a presentation that I'm going to share in just a second here, and it really focuses around managing the outcomes and then really planning work based on outcomes and their relationship with OKRs and how all that comes together. I'm going to try to take about 30 minutes or so to get through that presentation and leave as much time as I can for questions. And then if we don't have time to get to all the questions at the end, hopefully we can follow up in real time on Twitter as we move forward, okay? So I'm going to share my screen with you and jump into this presentation. Excellent. Screen is being shared. I'm going to assume the answer to that is yes. There it is. Yes. Excellent. All right. Let's get into it. All right. So here's a good question. If we're going to talk about outcome-based product planning, what we want to ask ourselves is what do people love about the products that we love? Right. If you think about the most popular products that we use, the hardware, the software, Amazon products, Netflix products, Apple products, Google products, whatever products you love, right? What do people love about those products? And if you were to ask the users of those products, no one would ever say, I love my iPhone because it's delivered on time, right? I love Netflix because it's delivered on budget. Right. Google Maps is awesome because they hit their deadline. Right? Like nobody ever talks about products like that, right? People love their products because they make them happy, because it solves a problem or it meets a need, right? It keeps them connected. It brings them closer to their loved ones. It allows them to operate from wherever they are in the world, right? And this is the way that consumers define success, right? The product made me more successful. It made me happier. It made me more efficient. It allowed me to balance my work in a way that makes me more successful. And this is the way that we need to think about defining the success of our products and services. And what's interesting about this is that if we start to define the success of our products in terms of customer success, right? We made customers more successful. We've seen their behavior change, right? As opposed to we shipped the feature, we hit the deadline, it was blue, and the boss was happy, right? Then if we change the way that we communicate about and measure success, then we have to change the way that we plan our work and the way that we communicate and talk about our work. And it really is a fundamental shift from linear product planning to more continuous product planning. Now, look, there was a time when linear product planning makes sense, right? When there's relatively low risk in the thing that we're building, when we know exactly what the end state of the thing that we're building is going to look like, what it's going to do, and in kind of with a very high level of confidence, what people are going to do with that product, we can communicate the product development plan linearly, right? We've got low risk and high certainty in these types of products. And there was a point in time where that actually made some kind of sense with software, with digital products and services, because there was a time when software came in a box. I don't know if you remember that time, but when I started my career, software came in a box and you went to the store and you had to buy a box of software. Now, when you're shipping boxes of software to store shelves, there is a linear process to that. At some point, you have to be done because you then have to mass reproduce the software, put it in a box, shrink wrap it, and distribute it out to these particular stores. And in order to predict that linear process, right, we used a tool called the roadmap, right? And in these low risk, high certainty worlds. Now, look, when it comes to building physical things like bridges and statues and manufacturing, we're definitely in low risk, high certainty world. When it comes to static software, like we had 20, 25 years ago, it's not necessarily low risk or high certainty, but we have to hit that end point, right? And with these types of products, the way that we communicated our work, the way that we to our stakeholders, to the market, to our users, was the roadmap, because it's easy to communicate those plans in a linear fashion. It matches the way that we perceive time. And the map is a great metaphor for this kind of planning, right? We're going to start at point A. We're going to point B. There's a distance between those 2 points, and we estimate it'll take us this much time and this much money and this many people to get from here to there, right? And the goal is to get to there, deploy a very specific set of things, and assume that they're going to work and that people will do exactly what we expect them to do with that thing. In the static software world, that made sense because we had to get to a period of done. We don't live in that world anymore, right? For better, not for worse. For better, we do not live in a static digital world anymore. We live in a continuous world, a world driven by software, a world driven by continuous software, where the products update continuously. You do not go to the store and buy a box of software. The websites update automatically. Your apps update automatically. Services update automatically. And the pace of that continuous updating is getting faster and faster and faster. In fact, just to kind of drive it home, Amazon, right? Amazon, at the extreme edge of all of this today, ships code to production every second, right? Every second, some Amazon customer somewhere in the world receives new bits, new code, right? Every second they put something out into the world. That's the extreme end of things, right? We don't have to do it that way, but that's what we can do. And so already we're getting into this situation where this communicating our plans becomes nearly impossible. If you're shipping something every second, right, across an organization, how do you communicate that in a roadmap? Right? It becomes kind of ridiculous. Now, look, the reality is that it actually gets a little bit worse, or at least a little bit more challenging, right? Because not only are we shipping software much more frequently and continuously, right? This idea that we can predict what our users, the humans that we serve, will do with that product is increasingly unpredictable. Human behavior is complex. It's irrational at times. It's unpredictable. And in many, many cases, it actually emerges through the use of our systems, right? Even if we think that people are going to do something with the product, and then they actually do it, over time, that behavior evolves and people start to do things that we never expected. They find ways to use our product that we never designed them to do, and they actually start to do things that surprise us, that shock us, that really make us rethink what we're doing. And so just because we made a plan at some point in the process, right? We're like, hey, this is what the product is going to do. This is what it's going to look like. This is the feature set, and it's going to be awesome, right? It doesn't mean that it's going to work as we hoped. And it doesn't mean that it still makes sense when we get to sort of feature complete, right? When we build all those features that we had planned, it doesn't necessarily mean that it still makes sense to build all those features, right? Because new behavior may have emerged in the system. New competition may have emerged in the market. There was some kind of shift in geopolitics or a pandemic or whatever it is, right? There are all these elements that we can't predict, that by the time we get to all the features that we had planned in our roadmap, they do not necessarily make sense. And so it's that rigidity of the roadmap that actually begins to inhibit the agility of our work, of our teams, and our organizations. And I use the word lie, and I use the word lie here about linear roadmaps, and I know it's a strong word because I know that we're not liars, right? We don't want to lie to our bosses. We don't want to lie to our colleagues. We don't want to lie to the market, but we're expected to put forward a plan. And when we put forward a rigid, linear, feature-based product roadmap, we set expectations about dates. We set expectations about features, about ROI, and then we are on the hook for that. And again, what if something new emerges? A competitive threat, new human consumption patterns, right? A pandemic, right? How do we then adjust this if we've committed to this linear roadmap? It's a really interesting challenge. Let me tell you a story. 2008, my gosh, that was a long time ago. 14 years ago, in October of 2008, I got a new job. It was in New York City, and I was the director of user experience at The Ladders, which was a job board at the time for people who made $100,000 or more. So it was executive job search, basically, is what we did. Now, I joined, and I don't know if you recall October 2008, but October 2008 was a very bad month for the US economy initially, and then the global economy. Within 3 weeks of joining The Ladders, Lehman Brothers melted down, and the financial crisis followed very, very quickly. Now, we were serving a large chunk of executives in the financial services space. So overnight, the day before Lehman Brothers melted down, we had a balanced ecosystem of jobs and job seekers, which is what you need in a job search. It's like a dating site, right? Overnight, literally overnight, went to sleep, woke up the next day, Lehman Brothers melts down the next day, and our ecosystem looks like this. Tons of job seekers, no jobs. We had a 9-month roadmap planned, committed to, scoped out, estimated, right? Delivered as PR and marketing to the market. What do we do in that case, right? Do we just follow the plan blindly, stick our head in the sand? Right? Do we adjust course? Are we even capable as an organization? We were a high growth company, no more than 400 people at its maximum size, right? Still difficult to turn a ship like that that's got a commitment for the next 9 months, right? But we had made that commitment, and the rigidity of that linear planning was a real issue. And so the question is, how can we respond effectively to these challenges that come up, right? We can't be agile. We can't inspect and adapt. We can't sense and respond. We can't build, measure, learn if we use this linear, rigid planning model, because the world will throw obstacles at us, challenges, surprises, and it will break our plans. And and that's going to hurt, right? Because getting those plans committed to, the organizational inertia behind them, it's hours of work, hours of negotiation, finalizing the list, getting sign off, right? What we're trying to do is to get rid of this, right? It becomes really, really difficult because we've committed to that, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to redefine our roadmaps away from focusing on features and output and putting together product roadmaps and product plans that are focused on outcomes. And our goal is to introduce our organization to the outcome-based product plan. So let me tell you how we're going to get there, okay? Step one, the first thing we have to do is to change the question that we are asking when we write our roadmap, when we make our plans. We have to change the question that we are asking. The usual question that either you get or that you ask your team is, what will we build, right? What are we making? That's the old question. We have to change that question to the new question, right? Instead of what will we build, we need to ask ourselves and our teams, what will people be doing differently if we succeed as an organization, as a product team, whatever it is, right? If we do a great job, what will the people that we serve be doing differently? We have to change the question, right? What we're doing is we're moving away from output. What will we build is focused on features. What will people be doing differently is focused on outcomes, measures of human behavior, right? That fundamentally shifts the conversation for our planning and communication purposes, right? What will people be doing differently? Step two, okay, is to change how we view our work. Typically, especially if we've had any level of success, we view our work from the inside out, right? We know what we're doing. We're going to push this work out to the market. People are going to love it. It's going to be amazing. But the reality, and I'm sorry to tell you this, like not all of us at least, we're not geniuses delivering magic products to people who don't know they need them, right? Not everyone is Steve Jobs, right? We're empathetic problem solvers for our users. We want to give them solutions that make them more successful. And so we have to start taking a look from the outside in, looking at it from a customer perspective and asking, what are they doing? What are they trying to do? What's getting in their way? And where are they successful? And where are they not successful? Again, taking a look at their behavior patterns. And then the third step of coming up with this outcome-based roadmap or this product plan is to change the destination. Right? The destination is not, we're going to ship this feature, it'll be blue, we'll get it done by Thursday, right? But instead, the destination is to talk about our plans for what kind of success we're going to deliver to our customers, right? It's an advertisement, it's a marketing tool of your intention to your customers, to your clients. We're going to make applying for a mortgage 10 times easier, right? We're going to make it infinitely simpler for you to buy a car, right? To find your next job. We're going to communicate that to our peers, to our stakeholders, to our colleagues, and to our customers, right? That is ultimately our goal, is to start to move that conversation away from features. So let's take a look and see what this actually looks like, okay? Because I've talked about it for a little bit. Let's look at it, okay? First and foremost, okay, we're going to break down every piece of detail on this particular slide. We start at the top. We start with a longer-term strategic theme. Some companies call these epics, right? But the goal is that these are strategic. You have to really think about this from a strategy point of view. We want to commit to the strategy for 6 to 9 months, right? So for the kind of foreseeable future, and foreseeable is debatable, right? But let's say 6 to 9 months, strategically, we are looking at expanding into North America. We are looking at opening up an adjacent business. We're looking at targeting a new audience, whatever it is. Okay, so we're looking at those, and we can have different teams assigned to different strategies in the organizations, or maybe different business units, right? Next, we look at our quarterly goals. Now, I'm using quarters, by the way, because quarters are shorter than a year. That's it, right? Anything shorter than the cycle that you're currently using now is good. I'm using quarters simply because they're shorter than a year, and a year is the usual cycle for most organizations. Okay. Now we look on a quarterly basis and we set our outcome-based goals on a quarterly basis. Now, OKRs, objectives and key results, are outcome-based goals. The key results need to be outcomes. They need to be measures of human behavior. And so we set these OKRs on a quarterly basis, right? In Q1, we're going to target these behaviors. In Q2, we think it'll be these behaviors, and so on and so forth. We then start to talk about, well, what are we going to make, right? And the interesting thing here is that we position the things that we are going to build by wording them as hypotheses, things that we may build. And by wording the work that we think we're going to do as hypotheses, we inject doubt into the feature conversation, right? So we're not saying we're going to build X, we're going to build Y, we're going to build Z. What we're saying is we believe that if we build X, it will result in this change in behavior in our customers. And we believe that if we build Y, it will result in this change in behavior, right? And so what we're saying is we think that these are the things that we are going to work on. They're going to help us achieve the behavior changes that we're looking for. But if they don't, then they're wrong, and we reserve the right to change course. Now, the interesting thing here is, again, we talked about the continuous world that we live in, the emergent behavior, the emergent changes in the marketplace, right? We have a certain level of commitment in the short term, right? So in the foreseeable future, we have some amount of foresight. We can look ahead 3 months and say, you know what? I think we can comfortably say that out of these 10 things, or out of these, out of all the things that we could build, these 10 things are at least the first 10 hypotheses that we might work towards. And then in Q2, there's some spillover that we might look at, and maybe further on one more thing. But the further out in time that we look, the less accurately we can predict, right? We can't predict the future, and all this stuff emerges from use. So we have fewer guesses. So by the time we get out to like Q3 or 3 or 4 quarters away from where we are today, we don't know, right? We don't know what we're going to build, and that's okay, right? Think about it as like you're walking through a fog, right? As you walk through a fog, and you'll notice my fog building into my slide here in a second. I worked very hard on this transition. I just wanted you to know. When you walk through a fog, you can see 3, 4, 5 steps ahead of you, but you don't see 10 steps ahead of you. or 15. And so you're not going to go running full speed 15 or 20 steps. You might fall off a cliff or hit a tree or a brick wall. You're going to walk 3 or 4 or 5 steps, and you're going to assess whether or not you can continue walking another 3 or 4 or 5 steps. And if you can, terrific. If it still makes sense to go in that same direction, keep going. But if all of a sudden you find yourself in front of a tree, you need to pivot, make a left turn, make a right turn, go the other way. And what we're doing here is that we are building evidence-based real-time decision-making on a quarterly basis, right? We work towards our outcomes on a quarterly basis. At the end of every quarter, we check in. Hey, what did we build? What did we decide to pivot on? What didn't work? What did we learn? Does it still make sense to head towards these outcome goals? Should we change the outcome goals? And if so, what are we going to work on in the next quarter? And how does the planning shift further downstream? So we can speak it with more certainty now to Q2 and Q3, right? Whereas Q4 is still a little fuzzy, but we keep moving that forward using evidence. Now, to build this outcome-based product plan, we have to start with a clear business problem. Now, I've got an example here on screen that I'm going to share with you, but to give you a sense of how to actually go about doing this, is we want to start with the problem, the strategic problem that we want to address in the next 6 to 9 months, right? So in this particular case, it's hypothetical. We built an online learning service to help lawyers maintain their credentials. We've observed that they sign up for an account, take a course, and never come back. This decreases the benefit for continuing education. It's expensive for us because we have to keep acquiring new customers rather than selling additional courses to existing ones, right? That's our strategic problem, and we're taking that on. You start with the problem, and you turn that business problem into a positive goal, right? If you took that problem statement that I just showed you, right, and you turn it into a positive goal, if we solve the problem, what does that look like? Well, if we solve it, then we've built an effective and engaging continuing education learning product for the entirety of a lawyer's career to ensure their skills are current. Right? That's our goal. If we solve that, then they don't go anywhere, right? This is what that could look like. And what we've done here, right, is we started to put together a strategic objective, right? This is the objective that we're looking for. Now, if we solve the problem, we ask that key question again. What will people be doing differently? And in this particular case, we start to write down the behavior changes that we're looking for that tell us that we've actually built this amazing continuing education system for lawyers, right? So each user will take at least 3 courses each year. 25% of new customers will come from the word of mouth referrals, and each law firm that signs up registers at least 50% of its staff, right? Those are the behaviors that tell us that we've built something valuable. And these are your key results. Outcomes and key results are the same thing, right? And what we've done here is we've started to set our outcome-based goals for our quarters, right? What we've done here is we've written our first OKR statement. So when you put it all together, it looks like this. Our strategic objective for the next 9 months is to build this effective and engaging continuing ed learning product. And these are the ways that we'll know that we've actually done that. These are the outcomes that we're looking for, right? And as I mentioned before, right, the OKRs that you write become your quarterly planning goals. Right? Those are the goals that we communicate to our stakeholders. And then once we've got those goals, we can work together as a team to brainstorm the hypotheses that we believe may achieve those OKRs, right? So I told you before, right? We want to inject doubt into the process. So we use the word believe. We believe, we don't know, right? We believe we'll increase the number of classes taken by each customer by 300%. If mid-career lawyers feel like they're progressing ahead of average rates in their career with a leaderboard of internal and external usage stats, right? Gamification, right? That's our hypothesis. Now, if that doesn't drive a 300% increase in the number of courses taken by each customer, then it didn't work. We either chose the wrong feature or we designed or implemented it poorly, and we need to go back and fix it. So we're changing course based on evidence, and that's the kind of agility that we're working towards. And again, those hypotheses become the quarterly activities, as I showed you before. Now, what we end up doing after that is we have to actually start to test these hypotheses, right? The risks are determined in those ideas, and then we design experiments to test them. And our goal is to figure out the most important thing we need to learn first, and then the least amount of work that we need to do to learn it. We want to build these experiments collect evidence, and then scale up the hypotheses and kind of solidify the hypotheses that show promise, and pivot or kill the ones that don't. And we do that on a quarterly basis, right? Those quarterly check-ins give us time to reflect, decide, and to plan further, and to ask these questions to build the transparency into our ways of working, right? How are we trending towards our quarterly results, our key result goals? What are we learning? Does the work that we're doing still make sense, right? Should we keep funding this initiative, right? Should we pivot somewhere? What are we going to kill? What are we going to add to our backlog? What new ideas have emerged? Now, the interesting thing, I think I love about outcome-based product planning is that it explicitly requires teams to do product discovery. You have to go talk to customers. You have to run experiments. You have to do A/B tests because you don't know if the feature is going to work, and you don't know what manifestation of that feature is going to work. Like what combination of code, copy, design, value proposition, business model is going to drive the results that you're looking for. Now, as you start to head down this particular path, you're going to face some challenges from your colleagues and your stakeholders, right? Because look, first of all, your managers and your leaders, they are really used to telling you what to do, what to build, right? And it's going to drive some anxiety with them that says, well, I'm used to telling you what to do, and now I don't tell you exactly what to do. You tell me how things are coming out, and you're figuring out sort of your next steps. So we've got to build this this level of communication that enables the reduction of the anxiety and increases the transparency between what the team is doing and deciding, and what managers need to know, right, to do their work. So maybe at a high level, your plan looks like this, right? But at a more tactical level, right, we want to show this to our stakeholders so they're very clear about what we're working on this sprint, next sprint, future sprints, etc. Right? And that's really important. Now, if you're in a leadership position, you may be asking, well, I used to tell people what to do. Right? Now you're taking that away from me. I don't tell people what to make and when it should be due. Right? What do I do? Well, if you're in a leadership role, your job is to define and clarify that strategy. You need to help your team set guardrails and scopes. They don't go all over the place, right? We're working on the mobile channel. Let's stay focused on the mobile channel, right? You help them make key decisions because the data that comes back is never black or white, right? It's always shades of gray. And you help your team remove obstacles so that they can do the discovery work, so that you can facilitate their success. Now, the interesting thing is that if you want to work this way, and if you want this outcome-based product planning to work, there's an onus on the team as well, right? We can't just demand that our managers change what they're doing. We also have to change what we're doing, right? As a team, we want to practice radical transparency. We want to over-communicate. This is what we're doing. This is what we're learning. These are the decisions that we're making. Are you okay with that, right? Communicate up and out proactively. Reinforced how you're trending towards your outcomes, towards your key results, and check in after every short cycle. Your sales team is going to push back on this as well. Hey, if I don't know what features you're building exactly or when they're going to come out, how do I sell it? Again, we want to sell the benefits, not the actual features, right? We're going to speak in outcomes. We're going to reduce the time that it takes to apply for a mortgage by 90%. That's our goal, right? Sell that, right? Because those outcomes have financial impact for everybody involved in these types of transactions. Look, to kind of wrap this up rather quickly, to give you some time to ask questions, outcome-based product planning is the source of agility, right? Because we're not committing to a fixed feature set by a fixed date. It allows us to adjust course based on what we're learning, right? We can be objective and we can make those evidence-based decisions rather than the highest paid person's opinion or the plan that we've committed to, regardless of what's happening in the space around us. And then most importantly, look, outcome-based product planning, it helps us stop lying to ourselves. Like, do we ever really fulfill the plans? We really don't, right? So let's start being more honest with ourselves and our bosses about what we're building, why we're building it, and how it's succeeding in the marketplace, and take advantage of the continuous world that we work in today. Okay. So first of all, thank you very much for listening, and thanks for coming. I know this was a lot of stuff very, very quickly. So we've got about 10 minutes to take your questions. And then of course we can continue the conversation online somewhere else.
Okay, so first of all, thanks so much, Jeff, for an excellent talk. Always a pleasure to welcome you to speak at our community. So really appreciate your time today. So folks, please do add your questions in the chat. I see a couple in there already. So we'll hopefully get through at least 2 or 3. So let's start with a question from Ali. So thank you, Ali. Do you have to wait on the quarter to finish to start planning the next quarter's OKRs?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. It's a really good question. And it's not a question that I get asked very often. I mean, look, I think we're continuously planning. I don't. So I think the short answer to your question is no, right? I think there's a continuous planning effort that's going on because you're hopefully you're collecting evidence on a sprintly basis, right? So every sprint you put something out there, you start to collect some kind of data, qualitative data or quantitative data, and that's starting to inform your plan for the next quarter, right? And so you might start to make some pretty clear decisions that say, in the plan, we talked about doing feature X in Q2. Data we're getting already says feature X isn't going to work, right? So we're already killing feature X from Q2. So I think that you can definitely do some continuous planning en route so that when you arrive at that quarterly check-in, right, the quarterly check-in should be forward-looking, right? If you're practicing that radical transparency, we should be like, here's what we're going to do moving forward because we all know what's happened in the last quarter. Right? If your quarterly check-ins are like, here's what we did in the last quarter, there was a breakdown in communication, right? So if you're doing that radical transparency and you're making these decisions en route, there should be no surprises at that quarterly planning. So yeah, you can definitely get a head start on that.
That's great. Thank you for the question, Ali. So next question from Coralie. What about long-term investment that needs a little bit more of buy-in?
So the thing with longer term initiatives, I think, is one way to deal. I'll tell you one way to deal with that. One way to deal with that is to build low risk, low investment learning into upcoming sprints. So instead of saying, look, we've got this kind of massive idea, right? But it's a big deal and we don't know if it's going to work. So we're going to break it down into its component parts and maybe some of the biggest risks. And we're going to build some learning into the first couple of sprints of Q1. Or maybe we're just going to do learning on this idea over the course of Q1 and see if we can just build up enough evidence to justify investing in this heavily moving forward. And so if you can, and ideally, you don't want to make that investment decision without that evidence. Right. And so if you're looking to get that buy-in, collecting that data from experimentation, from product discovery should help you make a compelling case that says we should commit, 5 million euros to this thing over the next 3 quarters. And here's the data that justifies that. We've built some experiments in the last quarter to prove that out.
That's great. Thanks, Jeff. Next one, slightly related from Justin. Thank you, Justin. Are there any risks with quarterly objectives to be transformed into quarterly releases?
Yes, absolutely. Look, people see features in a list and they're like, great, I'm getting that on Thursday. And they're like, and Thursday comes around and they're like, where's my thing? And you're like, oh, we killed it. Right. So yes, there's always that risk. And so how do we mitigate that? So again, I'm going to say it again, radical transparency, right? Again, if you show up at the end of a quarter and you've decided to kill a feature that I love and you didn't tell me, then I'm going to show up for your quarterly review and be like, where's my feature? Right? You told me you were building it. You told me you'd make it blue. I really like blue. You can see in my office, right? Where's my feature? I'm going to be fairly upset with you about that as your stakeholder. But if along the way you're saying, hey, Jeff, that blue feature that you love? We keep testing it. We've built prototypes. We've talked to customers. We've even got kind of an A/B test on this thing happening. We built an unscalable version of it, but still it's out there. It's not resonating. It's not landing. We can't get people to do the thing that we're looking for, and we're thinking about killing it. What do you say? Right? At the very least, we can have a conversation en route about that. Right? And that's my job, right? That's kind of my job as the stakeholder. Is to help you make that decision. Now, hopefully, you get stakeholders like me who are humble and make evidence-based decisions. And I know those are rare, right? But the idea is you want to make a strong case along the way while collecting evidence so that if you're not going to release something that was in the communication and in the plan, people are aware ahead of time. Because again, if you show up at that quarterly review and you didn't tell me you're not shipping my thing, yeah, you're going to have problems for sure.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, I think we have time for one last question from Crystal. So, how do you approach this when there's hardware dependencies for software development? The challenge is rigid hardware timeline.
Yeah. Super interesting. So I'll be honest with you, I don't have a ton of experience with hardware-based products and initiatives. So I'm going to take a bit of a guess here, and caveating that I don't have a ton of experience here. But the short of it is, you can. You know what? I'll tell you a story really quick. I actually thought of a story from a client. So I work with a client who does industrial manufacturing client, and they make all kinds of machinery, tube bending machines that cost $1 million, air conditioning units for skyscrapers, right? And I had them in a class where we talked about this, and they asked me the same question, like, how are we going to test a room-sized air conditioner that sits on top of a skyscraper and costs $10 million? And I said, well, what are the biggest risks about that? And they said, well, we've got all these new features, these kind of greening up of the features of the device, and it's expensive. I was like, great, let's put a brochure together and show it to some folks. So they did that. And then they got some feedback, and then they had to go say, okay, great, well, now we get some feedback, but what's the next step? I said, well, what's the next risk? They said, well, the size of this thing is pretty big. I was like, great, well, let's model it out. Can we model it out with cardboard? Like, if we just cut up and taped together some cardboard boxes to emulate the size of this thing, right? Let's do that, right? And so really getting creative about how to test the hardware in parallel to the software that you're building, so that hopefully you can start to build evidence for it's going to physically look like this, and the experience will look like this. So that's my story. I hope that was helpful. Like I said, I don't have a ton of experience with this.
That's great, and thank you, Crystal, for that question. So, folks, we're just about out of time. Thanks so much for all the questions. I do see one or two others in there. We will post the link to Jeff's Twitter in the chat. So, any follow-up questions, I think they can reach you at jboogie. Jeff is not on Twitter.
I can't. It's a long story, but I've had that for 15 years. So, run that.
And just in terms of if people want to learn more about OKRs, do you have any education people can look at or anything you'd recommend?
I do indeed, actually. So if you go to my website, jeffgothelf.com, there you will find a list of courses. There's some video-based, self-paced courses on OKRs, talks about really nicely produced videos, kind of talks a bit more detail about this stuff. And I also teach this stuff to companies as well. So just reach out. I'd love to work with you.
That's great. Listen, Jeff, thanks so much again for your time. We'll let you go, and we'll hopefully see you again soon.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, folks. See you next time.
See you.